Talisa awoke before dawn on the day she was to become Machia's wife, the warrior chosen by her father. Preparations were already underway in the Shawnee village along the banks of the Ohio River, with women raising the wedding lodge while elders sorted herbs for the ceremony. The 17-winters-old young woman watched everything with heavy eyes, feeling the weight of expectations upon her delicate shoulders. The marriage would unite two important families of the tribe, strengthening bonds and ensuring protection in times when the expansion of American settlements threatened their ancestral lands. Her father, Wematin, a respected leader among the Shawnee, had negotiated the agreement with pride, celebrating the alliance that would bring stability to his people in 1805, when the world around them was changing rapidly. Talisa understood the importance of her duty, but her heart remained cold at the thought of a future beside a man she barely knew. Her mother's gentle hands worked on her hair, adorning it with small feathers and beads that had belonged to generations of women in her family. Each braid represented a wish: fertility, wisdom, resilience, while her skin was painted with symbols of protection and renewal, marking her passage to a new phase of life. Talisa kept her eyes lowered, hiding the tears that threatened to stain the careful designs on her face. As the sun rose on the horizon, illuminating the verdant hills surrounding the village, Talisa felt her breathing grow heavier. She gazed into the distance, beyond the tents and fires, at the dense forest she had known since childhood, the place where she had learned to identify medicinal plants with her grandmother, where she had gathered wild berries on summer mornings, where she had hidden so many times to cry in secret since they announced her marriage. The forest seemed to call to her, offering an impossible refuge in that moment of suffocation. The ceremony was about to begin when Talisa asked for a moment to breathe fresh air, discreetly moving away from the women preparing her. Her steps led her beyond the last lodges, where the murmur of celebration began to mix with the sound of wind through the leaves. Without planning, her feet continued moving, first in hesitant steps, then in desperate flight, the beads and feathers in her hair tinkling like a warning as she advanced between ancient trunks, leaving behind everything she knew. The fabric of her ceremonial dress tore on thorns and low branches, leaving marks on her skin like red tears over the ritual paint. Talisa ran until her lungs burned, until her legs trembled, instinctively heading toward the river that marked the boundary between Shawnee territory and lands disputed with the settlers. The distant sound of drums and raised voices indicated that her absence had already been noticed, transforming her escape into an unforgivable offense. Exhausted and disoriented, Talisa found a small natural shelter between moss-covered rocks, where she curled up like a wounded animal. The shame she had brought upon her family mingled with the terror of the unknown, creating a storm in her chest as the forest darkened around her. She knew men would be sent to find her. Her father would not accept such humiliation, and Machia would certainly view her flight as an offense to his warrior's honor. Night fell over the forest, bringing with it the cutting cold and unsettling sounds that Talisa had never noticed during her daytime walks. Each crack of a branch made her curl up more tightly, imagining rough hands pulling her back, imaginary severe punishments like stories she had heard about women who defied traditions. Her dry lips murmured silent prayers, asking protection from the spirits of the earth she had always respected. When the first ray of light pierced through the treetops, Talisa heard footsteps approaching slowly, calculated like those of a hunter. Her entire body froze, muscles tensed by the certainty that she had been found by someone from her tribe, ready to face the consequences of her rebellion. However, when her eyes met those of the man standing a few steps away, she did not recognize a Shawnee, but rather the mixed features of someone whose blood told a different story. Before Talisa stood Nkosi, son of a Shawnee mother and Miami father, a man whose mere existence represented the conflict between tribes that for generations had disputed territories and resources. His dark eyes examined the young fugitive with a mixture of surprise and caution, immediately recognizing the ceremonial paintings and the meaning of her state. Nkosi was known in the borderlands as a guide and interpreter, someone who navigated between distinct worlds without fully belonging to either. Talisa had known stories about Nkosi since childhood, accounts laden with warnings and contempt, narratives about the son of the woman who had betrayed her people by uniting with an enemy during times of conflict. Her father frequently used Nokosi's name as an example of what happened to those who abandoned traditions, describing him as a man without honor, without place, condemned to wander between borders. Now he was there, with an unreadable expression, between her and the unknown territory beyond the river. With cautious gestures, like one approaching a frightened bird, Nokosi offered water from his leather canteen, maintaining a respectful distance while Talisa struggled internally between need and inherited pride. Thirst finally won, causing her to accept the container with trembling hands, drinking quickly while keeping her eyes fixed on the stranger whom, according to everything she had learned, she should despise on principle. Nokosi spoke in Shawnee with a slight accent, asking if she was injured, if she needed help without mentioning the obvious, that she was a bride in flight, that armed men were probably looking for her, that returning would mean facing the wrath of her people. His words were direct but gentle, devoid of the judgment Talisa expected, as if he perfectly understood what it meant to make choices that others considered unforgivable. Talisa's response came in silence, a simple negative shake of her head followed by tears that finally found a path between the ritualistic marks on her face. Nokosi nodded with understanding and pointed to the increasingly clear sky, indicating they should move quickly if they wanted to avoid the searchers, who would certainly come by the same path she had traveled. With momentary hesitation, Talisa accepted the extended hand that helped her rise, feeling the weight of generations of hostility dissolve momentarily before the urgent need for survival. For 3 days, Nokosi guided Talisa along paths that only the most experienced hunters knew, avoiding obvious trails and crossing streams to confuse any tracker. They moved mainly at dawn and dusk, taking advantage of the diffuse light that made it difficult to be seen from a distance, while during the hottest hours they rested in carefully chosen natural shelters. Nokosi shared knowledge that blended wisdom from different peoples, showing Talisa plants she had never learned to identify, survival techniques that mixed traditions from distinct tribes. The few words exchanged between them gradually became cautious conversations, where Talisa discovered truths different from the stories she had heard all her life. Nokosi spoke with respect about both peoples of his ancestry, explaining how his mother had not betrayed anyone, but found love where she least expected during a period of temporary truce. He told how he had grown up learning to honor both heritages, even when that meant being rejected by both sides, finding purpose in helping travelers and serving as a mediator in delicate negotiations. As they walked through deep valleys and crossed fields of tall grasses, Talisa felt her old certainties transform like the landscape around them. The ceremonial paintings on her skin had disappeared with light rains and baths in crystal waters, the adornments from her hair carefully stored in a small leather pouch that Nokosi had given her. Each step took them further from the life she had known, leading them to a mixed settlement where Nokosi said she could find temporary refuge among people who understood what it meant to begin again. On the 4th night, camped under a starry sky that seemed infinitely vaster than what Talisa had contemplated throughout her life in the village, Nokosi finally asked why she had fled. The question hovered between them like smoke, enveloping painful memories and fears silenced for years. Talisa stared at the flames of the small fire that warmed them, seeking courage to put into words what only her heart fully understood. With an almost inaudible voice, Talisa revealed how the arranged marriage was not just an unwanted union, but represented the end of the secret dream she had cultivated since youth, to become a healer like her grandmother, to preserve ancestral knowledge that was disappearing with the expansion of white settlements. She explained how Makya, respected for his strength and hunting skill, openly despised the work of wise women, considering such practices inferior to the achievements of warriors. Between the lines of her confession, there revealed itself not only the fear of a loveless marriage, but the terror of having her essence gradually suffocated by expectations she could never satisfy. The next morning, as they prepared to resume their journey, distant sounds alerted Nokosi. With the experience of one who had spent life between dangerous borders, he immediately recognized the pattern of movement. Not Shawnee hunters, but a group of armed settlers who traversed the region in search of unmarked lands. Quickly, he guided Talisa to a cave partially covered by dense vegetation, a hiding place he had known since adolescence. Sheltered in the damp darkness of the cave, they heard harsh voices approach, words in English laden with intentions that Talisa did not understand, but which made Nokosi's body stiffen with silent alarm. Through minimal gestures, he indicated they should remain completely still, as men passed so close that the smell of tobacco and sweat invaded the hideout. Talisa felt Nokosi's protective arm around her shoulders, an instinctive gesture that conveyed security amid the unknown danger. When the men finally moved away, Nokosi explained in whispers how that group represented a different threat from her people's searches. Settlers who saw indigenous lands as empty spaces to be taken, who did not distinguish between different tribes, only considered all as obstacles to be removed. He spoke about recent massacres in mixed settlements, about broken treaties and empty promises he had heard in his travels as an interpreter, painting a more complex picture of the world beyond the tribal borders that Talisa knew. Night came with intense rain that covered their tracks, allowing them to continue the journey under the protection of darkness. They walked side by side over increasingly steep terrain, approaching the hills that Nokosi explained were considered neutral territory, where small groups of different origins coexisted in fragile harmony. As they advanced, Talisa noticed how their steps had naturally synchronized, how their movements seemed complementary, how words gradually became unnecessary between them. Dawn revealed a protected valley between gentle mountains, where smoke from fires indicated human presence dispersed among leafy trees. Nokosi pointed to small structures that combined native and colonial building techniques, explaining how that place welcomed people who, by choice or circumstance, lived on the margins of colliding worlds. There, he told her with a discreet gleam in his eyes, Talisa could find wise women who preserved knowledge from many different traditions, who freely shared what they knew about medicinal plants and healing rituals. Talisa's arrival at the mixed settlement was received with respectful curiosity by its inhabitants, whose gazes demonstrated understanding without need for detailed explanations. An elder with grey hair, whom Nokosi introduced as Chixie, offered shelter in her modest cabin, immediately recognizing in the young Shawnee the same determination that had brought her to that place decades before. Chixie's wrinkled hands worked constantly with dried herbs, while telling stories of other women who had refused imposed destinies, creating in the process a legacy of knowledge that transcended tribal barriers. For weeks, Talisa absorbed teachings she would never have access to in her native village, learning how different tribes treated the same ailments, how remedies could be adapted when traditional plants became scarce, how healing rituals evolved to respond to new diseases brought by Europeans. Her agile hands quickly mastered preparation and storage techniques. Her attentive gaze identified subtle variations in similar plants. Her open mind connected seemingly distant knowledge into integrated systems of understanding. Nokosi regularly visited the settlement, bringing news from distant territories and necessary supplies obtained in exchanges with traders at the frontiers. Each return was marked by increasingly long glances between him and Talisa, conversations that extended until dawn around nearly extinguished fires, comfortable silences that communicated more than words. Chixie observed the development of that bond with silent wisdom, recognizing patterns that repeated through generations, souls that found each other precisely when they needed one another most. When winter came with cutting winds and snow that isolated the settlement from the outside world, Nokosi remained, occupying a small cabin near Chixie's. During the long, cold nights, he helped Talisa perfect her rudimentary English, sharing stories he had heard in his travels, describing changes he had observed in settlement patterns, territorial policies, alliances between tribes trying to resist the inevitable expansion. Through these conversations, a broader map of the world took shape in Talisa's mind, revealing complexities she had never imagined during her protected life in the village. On a particularly harsh morning, when the settlement awoke, covered by a thick blanket of virgin snow, an unexpected visitor arrived bringing news that shook the tranquility built over the last months. A Delaware hunter, known to Nokosi from old exchanges, reported that Shawnee warriors led by Makia continued searching for the fugitive bride, driven not only by wounded honor, but by rumors that she had been kidnapped by the half-breed son of the traitor, a narrative that transformed Talisa's escape into a potential spark for renewed conflicts between tribes that maintained fragile peace. The news about the continued searches brought back the fear that Talisa believed she had left behind, enveloping the settlement in palpable tension for days. Heated debates occurred among the informal leaders of the mixed community about how to proceed. Some advocated that Talisa should be escorted to even more distant territories. Others suggested attempts at negotiation with the Shawnee through neutral messengers, while more pessimistic voices warned about the possibility of retaliation against the entire settlement if they discovered her whereabouts. Nkosi remained silently thoughtful during these discussions, his normally expressive face transformed into an impenetrable mask while considering options and consequences. On a particularly cold night, when everyone had retired, he sought Talisa in Chixi's cabin, finding her awake by the dying fire, eyes fixed on the flames as if seeking answers in the dancing forms. Without initial words, he sat beside her, their shoulders almost touching in the small space illuminated only by reddish embers. In a low voice, laden with determination, Nkosi revealed his decision. He would return alone to Shawnee territory to meet Wemetin, Talisa's father, and present the complete truth about what had happened. He would explain how he had found his daughter already in flight, how he had protected her not out of defiance or vengeance, but out of basic human compassion that transcended old rivalries. He would offer reparation according to traditional customs, assuming responsibility for having interfered in internal matters of the tribe, but would defend Talisa's choice as the legitimate right of a woman who sought to follow a vocation greater than matrimonial arrangements. Talisa felt her heart freeze before those words, recognizing the mortal danger embedded in the seemingly noble plan. She knew her father's temperament, Makia's wounded pride, the old stories that portrayed Nkosi as a symbol of betrayal, factors that made any peaceful resolution unlikely. With trembling fingers, she touched Nkosi's arm, silently imploring him not to risk his life for a conflict he had not initiated, for a decision she had made alone on that distant morning when she abandoned everything she knew. Nkosi's response came in the form of a delicate gesture, his hand covering hers with comforting warmth, his eyes finally meeting hers with an intensity that dispensed with words. In that moment of deep connection, both recognized what had grown between them during months of shared journey, a bond that went beyond circumstantial protection or gratitude, a feeling that did not even possess an adequate name in the languages they spoke. Without grandiose declarations or impossible promises, they sealed that mutual recognition with a closeness that communicated more than any word could express. The next morning, before the first rays of sun touched the snowy valley, Nkosi departed carrying only the essentials for the risky journey. The entire community gathered to witness his departure, faces marked by concern and admiration as they watched the solitary figure disappear among trees covered in white. Talisa remained motionless for hours after everyone returned to their cabins, her eyes fixed on the point where Nkosi had disappeared, her heart divided between fear for what he would face and pride for the courage he demonstrated. Weeks passed without news, as winter gradually gave way to the first timid signs of spring. Talisa continued her studies with Chixi, but her mind frequently wandered beyond the mountains, imagining confrontations, dialogues, possible outcomes for Nkosi's self-imposed mission. During this period of anguishing wait, her relationship with the community deepened. She was no longer the temporary outsider, but an integral part of the social fabric of that place. Her skills as a healer's apprentice requested and respected by diverse families. One afternoon, as she collected the first herbs of the season on the lower slopes of the mountains, Talisa spotted distant figures approaching by the main path that led to the settlement. Her heart accelerated with a mixture of hope and fear as she tried to distinguish silhouettes against the setting sun. When she finally recognized Nkosi's familiar form leading a small group, she dropped her basket of herbs and ran without hesitation, ignoring surprised looks from people she passed. A few steps away, Talisa stopped abruptly upon identifying who accompanied Nkosi, her own father, Wemetin, along with two respected elders of the Shawnee tribe. Her father's face, more aged than in her recent memories, carried a complex expression where traditional rigor mingled with something that seemed like contained relief. Nkosi, noticing her presence, offered a discreet smile that communicated unexpected success in his impossible mission. In a formal ceremony conducted before the entire mixed community, Wimatin declared that after long deliberations with the tribal council, the decision had been made. Talisa would not be forced to return, nor to fulfill the matrimonial commitment. Makya had accepted alternative compensation offered by the family of another young Shawnee woman, while the council recognized that denying a healer's calling would bring greater harm to the people than any breach of matrimonial agreement. With a voice that oscillated between authority and rarely demonstrated emotion, Wimatin expressed pride for the daughter who had had the courage to follow deep conviction, even at the risk of losing everything she knew. In her father's carefully chosen words, Talisa identified Nkosi's diplomatic influence, whose skill in navigating between different worlds had allowed building bridges where before only walls of misunderstanding existed. The elders accompanying Wimatin formally presented a request that Talisa eventually return for periodic visits to the Shawnee village, sharing acquired knowledge with apprentices interested in preserving healing traditions, thus creating a channel of communication between communities, historically separated by mutual distrust. When the full moon illuminated the valley that night, after a celebration that united songs and dances from diverse traditions, Talisa and Nkosi walked together to an elevated point that offered a panoramic view of the surrounding mountains. Under a starry sky that had witnessed so many similar human stories through the centuries, they exchanged simple promises of mutual commitment, sealing a union that did not strictly follow Shawnee or Miami traditions, but honored the essence of both. Their intertwined hands symbolized a rare possibility in times of tumultuous changes, finding true belonging not in demarcated territories or exclusive loyalties, but in the shared courage to create new paths when the old ones no longer serve the heart. If you like this story, leave a like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next stories.